we've seen the court cases where people are saying, hey, I told the cops I didn't want to turn over the footage on my neighbor. So they came back with a warrant for that footage and the footage of my own home, the footage of the inside of my home, the footage possibly even from people's bedroom.
For years, Silicon Valley has peddled the idea of disruptive innovation, moving fast and breaking things, going max. They promise the public quick and easy fixes to their biggest problems, but somehow those solutions almost never come to fruition. Albert Fox Cahn is a legal scholar and founder of the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. He's also the author of the new book, Move Slow and Upgrade: The Power of Incremental Innovation. Today, he's joining me to talk about some of Silicon Valley's most disastrous innovations and how the move fast, break things ethos of tech is hurling us all into a hellscape. Hi, Albert. Welcome.
Thank you for having me back.
Okay, so to start off, I feel like we're all familiar by now with this idea of like moving fast and breaking things. I remember seeing posters about this at Meta's old headquarters in the Facebook offices. I was actually at the Facebook F8 when he, I think, made that original declaration. It was like a decade ago. Why is this such a dangerous philosophy for tech? I mean, obviously, the concept of breaking things does not sound good when it's technology that we rely on. But why is this sort of idea of like moving quickly and innovating even just dangerous?
Tech companies have been telling us for years that we need to move fast and break things, and they moved fast and they broke a lot of things. They broke essential public infrastructure. They broke trust. They broke a lot of the ways our democracy works. And in this book, we're talking about how we're often told that our only choices are either invest in this radical concept of innovation on the one hand or accept the status quo on the other. But what we do is we look at all these ways that over the years, innovation hasn't been this like eureka moment. It's actually been the slow, incremental, boring work of refining existing systems, investing in proven solutions, and incrementally upgrading the status quo. And so we're just challenging that innovation narrative and all the ways that Silicon Valley has just broken things over the years.
That doesn't sound as profitable. Is that like the main issue here, is that they just want to like maximize profits?
Well, this is the thing. It's more profitable on average, right? It's the difference between investing $1 in a savings account and putting it in a lottery ticket, right? Venture capitalists keep telling us, well, we need to invest in these groundbreaking changes because one of them will revolutionize the world. And yes, so many of these companies will fail. Yes, so many of them will go by the wayside. But this is how things advance. And what we detail is that actually, oftentimes for public policymakers, for corporate leaders, for just people facing these sort of tech choices in our daily lives, the best options are oftentimes the boring analog ones. And part of what we're trying to show is that rather than thinking that the boring option is somehow outmoded or that you're losing out on the chance for change, the boring option is often going to be the safest long-term bet. But there isn't as much of an investment upside in the extreme cases. And this sort of hype cycle relies on us constantly chasing those extremes.
Yeah, I know. I feel like it's just this like mentality of like beating the markets and like getting that next quarter's number better than the previous quarter's number. Never mind if that like screws over long-term growth. I mean, honestly, I feel like the metaverse reminds me of this, where like they forced the metaverse out. It was supposed to be this thing. It was like used to kind of bolster corporate profits. And then it's like, whatever even happened to that? Like it just kind of fell apart. It was messy. I don't know if it was like harmful necessarily, but it just seemed like just a waste of everyone's time.
100%. And so we have a chapter on the metaverse where we detail the ways that, Mark Zuckerberg renamed his whole company. You saw multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. You saw Microsoft doing this huge gaming play, claiming that this was their entree into the metaverse. And at the end of it, billions of dollars wasted on this vision of the future that was laughable. And it's not just a matter of armchair quarterbacking the decisions after they go off the rails. We're showing the ways that people knew at the time these metaverse pivots were happening that it was never going to work out. And it's not just a really great way to have a bit of schadenfreude about the misadventures of Mark Zuckerberg and these other tech giants, but to kind of learn from that experience and not get hoodwinked again when we see the next play for the future. So, we look at, Apple Vision Pro and how, here you have Apple, iconic company. It is associated with revolutionizing so many forms of technology. And the Vision Pro came out and it's like, what is the use case for this? It's not that there isn't a killer app. There isn't a fundamental utility. You see this idea that you're going to create an augmented reality world around your home. And yes, you can instantly see how that could be cool in a science fiction novel. But when you're putting on the tech and seeing that you get a nauseating flicker every time you walk, it's dead on arrival. And we see that sort of mistake with the metaverse in so many of these corporate acquisitions and so many of these product launches.
I mean, it reminds me kind of also of like Cory Doctorow's, which I think he also has a book out about like intuitification and just kind of like the disparity between like the hype of these products and how they actually end up being used.
Yeah, so intuitification is kind of, it is the sucking force that takes the life force out of many of the promising platforms that for a beautiful glimmering moment, we actually have hope will change the world. I mean, I remember the early euphoria of TikTok when people thought this was genuinely going to be this egalitarian platform that would give a mass, audience to people simply based off of some sort of meritocratic algorithm. And then we saw it cannibalizing itself. We saw the need to just make money and to, yield to political power. And that sort of optimism quickly faded. And I think that with a lot of the, metaverse examples, and not just metaverse, with our cryptocurrency examples, let's take a moment to actually ask, is your product in any way addressing the problem you're claiming to solve? Or, as is often the case, did you invent a solution, then try to reverse engineer what problem you're going to take on? Because when we see that in the case of a lot of these technologies, that's a huge red flag that this is not an actual improvement. This is just innovation theater.
Oh, innovation theater is such a good way to put it. I love that. Yeah, there's so much disillusionment. I mean, I feel like actually by now, it's funny people felt that way about TikTok. I think that's because also just Musical.ly was like, I don't know, Musical.ly was never egalitarian, but it was like, there was this like energy to it. And this was still in like the 2010s when people had optimism. Now I think everyone is pretty like black pilled, but I see that kind of energy and that skepticism being, as I talk about all the time, as you know, on this channel, you've been on here before, like people are kind of diverting that resentment that people have towards the tech industry towards surveillance laws and saying, oh, like, look at how badly the metaverse went. Look at how badly crypto, AI, everything is going. This is why we need like mass surveillance laws for some reason. But I feel like that's been like this bad path.
It drives me crazy, right? Because I've been fighting these companies for years. I've been fighting the harms they've been doing for years. I've been suing them. I've been ranting about them. And then I see all these people coming in and using that energy to push forward the same mindset. But now instead of it being a sort of venture capital innovation narrative, it's surveillance innovation narrative. And suddenly you're being told, well, if we just monitor the age and identity of every person using these apps, somehow we're going to solve this array of problems that, some people think they're linked to, other people question. I mean, I've tried to get as radically offline as I can. I moved to Cambridge, UK. I'm in a castle. I'm in as analog a space as you can be. And so I know I am really privileged and lucky that I get to live this like offline Harry Potter life. But at the same time, even if you think that social media is really harmful, the idea that you're going to be able to solve this intractable issue about figuring out who is whom online and do it without creating all of the like Orwellian threats of a centralized surveillance state, it's just nonsense. And yet we see a lot of these, identity verification companies working with lawmakers who sell us that same narrative. And they're selling it to a lot of scared parents that, hey, if we have this mandate, if we have this law, we will fix all of this. And the truth is that these are really hard problems to fix where we have evidence-based alternatives to the, surveillance solutionism. But they simply aren't as appealing to lawmakers because they cost money, they take effort, and they actually take time.
If you're watching this video and you like my work, please support me on Patreon via the link below or buy a paid subscription to my tech and online culture newsletter at usermag.co. That's usermag.co. I don't have any long-term brand partnerships, and a lot of my content is effectively demonetized. I've lost major brand deals for speaking out on certain issues and for challenging power. As you can imagine, advertisers are not exactly eager to work with somebody who covers a lot of the topics that I cover and talks about the things that I talk about. These videos I make are entirely funded by you, and I can't continue to make them without your support. So if you get any value out of the videos that I create and you want me to be able to create more, please support me on Patreon or Substack via the links below. On Patreon, I do bonus episodes, monthly Q&A live streams, and post frequent updates about my work. My Substack newsletter gives you a bi-weekly roundup of everything that I'm seeing and reading and paying attention to online. You can also get my newsletter on Patreon. Once again, the links to everything are below in the description. Every dollar of your support makes such a difference. I think like Candace Odgers and Alice Marwick and other researchers that actually study this stuff for a living have done such a great job kind of dispelling these narratives. And there was that great report back in 2024 now that it was like Alice and a bunch of other researchers put out, just literally calling this a moral panic. And it was an indictment of this stuff. But I think it's so hard. I mean, something that I constantly hear from people on my channel every time I try and explain this to them is like, how can you say this is a moral panic if these companies are doing so much harm? I think they're thinking that like acknowledging the moral panic aspect and acknowledging that actually there is no evidence of any sort of widespread mental health, crisis among children due to social media specifically means that like we're somehow discounting the enormous harm that they do through, I would argue, like surveillance capitalism, all of the other stuff they do. I think it's hard for people to understand. There's a lot of nuance here.
Yeah, so one of the starting points I have with this is the brain doesn't magically change at 18. So the idea that somehow the design features that are, potentially detrimental as a teenager are going to be innocuous as an adult. Anyone with a cognitive science background will tell you that makes no sense. Obviously, younger users are going to have different risk profiles on average, but there's going to be a spectrum. And we know that there are going to be some particularly vulnerable users who are particularly at risk and others who are particularly resilient. Personally, I tend to have a slightly more downcast view of the overall social impact of social media. But it's not that I want to keep kids off of it. I just want to stop the exploitative practices at the core of it. And you can do that through generally applicable privacy protections. You can do this through protections against surveillance capitalism. And if you can do it for all users, because the surveillance capitalism, the algorithmic patterns, all the dark pattern prods to use the apps more and more, none of that is somehow perfectly okay for adults if we think that it's, deeply detrimental for kids. And so I think the moral panic part of it is this idea that we need the state to come in and to be, create this massive layer of tracking of that online activity in the supposed interest of the users it's surveilling, because the history of people being surveilled for their own good, quote unquote, only for that information to be used against them is long and heartbreaking. And that's where I think the solution being put forward, the innovation being put forward, is just not fit for purpose.
I mean, I think it's also just so important to note that, as we know, there are a lot of well-documented issues in society that are affecting children and are affecting adults, are affecting people's mental health. There is absolutely no effort to address any of those, which are significantly more impactful than even the studies that Jonathan Haidt cites, are not it's 0.05 percentage points or something. It's essentially negligible, so much of this. And there are things that have real harm to people that could do a lot more that we're not addressing. And so that just to me shows that this is not a real good faith effort to improve youth mental health,
I really do think this knee-jerk surveillance innovation response cycle that we have to so many different problems, it keeps failing us, right? So take, for example, the way that Ring surveillance, was supposed to be this breakthrough in home safety, that if you just put all of these internet-enabled cameras, that it would be this magical force field, this deflector dish against, anyone who was seeking to come into your property. And when we actually have seen people ask Ring for anything to substantiate that their technology worked, their case falls apart, And when we've looked at independent research on this, it's actually, there are some cases where ring installation correlates with increases in crime, increases in theft. But why did we get sold this in the first place? It's because, well, Amazon was delivering all of these packages that was putting in unsecured locations that was leading to an increase in, package thefts, which then justified the surveillance response. So Amazon owns the solution to the problem they're creating, but it doesn't actually protect anyone in the process. And what we've seen is, we're in an era where not only do those cameras fail to somehow magically ward off anyone who wants to do ill, but they become a potential tool against the homeowner when they're just one court order away from being used against them by law enforcement, by ICE. We see this vast, set of collaborations between law enforcement agencies and Ring to help provide access to that video footage. So now that suddenly the camera that you're installing in your living room in the hopes that somehow it will prevent a break-in is breaking into your most intimate moments whenever, the government wants to peer in, which sounds obviously conspiratorial and, very much like some bad Black Mirror episode. But we've seen the court cases where people are saying, hey, I told the cops I didn't want to turn over the footage on my neighbor. So they came back with a warrant for that footage and the footage of my own home, the footage of the inside of my home, the footage possibly even from people's bedrooms. It's really just another way that the technology is a better story than it is a solution.
Yeah. Well, when you think of that, like move fast, break things ethos too, I feel like we're seeing it with all surveillance technology, including, like you mentioned, ICE. Now ICE is getting body cameras, and they've got all these new apps and things where they scan your face and put you on a watch list and stuff. And it just seems like all of that is being rolled out so sloppily. And ICE is contracted with all these evil Silicon Valley tech companies now who don't have a good track record. And it seems like that's extending even towards the government.
Yeah. And I think body cameras are another classic example of this sort of innovation mindset, right? You had heartbreaking police violence. You saw people being killed by officers. And the solution from the Obama era Justice Department was, let's give officers lots of money for cameras. And, this is something I've been very clear for years. I wrote about it in the New York Times back in 2019 that this was a failed experiment. And we keep being told over and over again by lawmakers on both sides that somehow having this surveillance is going to keep us safe. But what have we seen? The most important videos of police accountability of the last 20 years have never come from body cams. They've always come from bystanders. The person who controls the camera controls the narrative. And when officers do release footage, so often it's selectively edited. It's withheld if it looks bad for officers. It's given over quickly when it tells a story they want the world to see. And so rather than creating a police accountability tool, all we did was give them yet another propaganda tool when, police departments already have so much power to control the public narrative and are already given so much deference by our legal system when it comes to their asserted version of the truth. And I don't know if even bystander videos are powerful enough to stand up to the misinformation of a president who's going to look at, federal officials killing someone, engaging in activity that would be called murder in almost any other circumstance, and to tell us that somehow it's not criminal, that somehow the victim was, attacking the officer's bullets. It is the level of Orwellian doublespeak where clearly the images are not enough on their own, but still the body cams just are a distraction, a wasteful distraction, and another failed high-tech Band-Aid that just covers up the problem without addressing it.
Yeah. I think of even just the existence of DOGE and what They did to the American government too, is this idea of like move fast, break things, go into US aid, got it, like do all this stuff. And ultimately we found out, I saw recently that reported that it cost the American taxpayer billions of dollars. Actually, the entire program was actually like a huge burden on taxpayers because it furloughed so many workers and because of all the like chaos that it basically caused.
No, I wrote the book with my co-author, Evan Selinger, before DOGE even existed. We finished writing it just before Trump was sworn into office. And so to then see all of our worst fears brought to life by Elon Musk and see the power of, this man to like seize so much data, blatantly disregarding so many federal privacy laws and creating this massive threat to American civil rights. It feels like a cannon loaded and primed to fire, aimed at the heart of our democracy, and all put forward with this justification that somehow the Silicon Valley ethos would quickly fix all of these elements of American government. And not only did it break so many agencies, we will spend years trying to figure out how many people DOGE killed, how many people have died because the loss of USAID funding, the loss of other vital frontline programs, the reduction in PEPFAR, AIDS funding. I mean, we have seen some of the most impactful programs promoting global health, stabilizing countries around the world, actually bringing improved quality of life to people, just gutted. And I sue the government for a living. I'm not someone who has some rosy picture of how the US government operates. I do not think it is a saintly institution, but we allowed ideologues to cannibalize and devastate some of the most noble and most valuable elements of our government. And I think it is a scandal. I don't know if there's words strong enough to capture just how much of a betrayal it was of any sense of morality.
Yeah, I know. It's so bleak. And of course, Elon Musk will never be held accountable, which is so depressing. I mean, I also see the rollout of AI as kind of related to the stuff that you're talking about. I feel like right now we're witnessing this, right? Like idea of like, just roll it out. Like the Washington Post, where I used to work, just did mass layoffs where they, are pivoting towards AI and like losing some of the most talented journalists, including like, I think their entire Middle East bureau. Like it seems so bleak.
Yeah. I mean, I will say the AI bubble, I believe, is starting to pop and people are realizing that they were sold a bill of goods because we had this rush to integrate AI into every area of life. And what did we get? We got massive amounts of AI slop. We saw a degradation in the quality of the information we're consuming online. We saw all of these industries trying to integrate AI as a substitute for human beings, and oftentimes then quietly backfilling the roles that they gutted because they realized that AI wasn't up to the task. Look, I am a giant nerd. I love machine learning. I love linear algebra. But it is not a crystal ball. And one of the things that, just to go back to these warning signs, there are a lot of times when you can see the differences between a credible claim about the role that AI can play and sort of the smoke and mirrors. Like when someone is telling you that AI can predict the future, that should be a massive, massive road flare that they are just completely full of smoke, because it is a way to analyze the past, not somehow gaze in through the mists of time. And yet we see in policing, in logistics, in almost every area of life, people are selling these algorithms where they're claiming to be able to do what is mathematically impossible.
I feel that way too. Like I love technology so much. Obviously, that's why I'm a tech journalist. And like, I love things that make my life easier. Like I'm not anti the concept of AI. Like there are things that I guess, are technically AI that I think do make our life better. I think like what you said though, is that there's been this also just misrepresentation of what AI is. Like when you mention machine learning, like that doesn't sound as good. And so I think people say like, they've rebranded machine learning as AI, and then they've also rebranded like a ton of other stuff that's not even that as like AI. And it sort of has become this like tech buzzword that is, they're slapping on everything. And it just means basically like we've automated this in some way, usually a worse way. And To me, that's what's so frustrating about it is like, yeah, I would love for like AI or whatever you want to call AI to like cure cancer. Sure, if that research is happening, that's great. But I think what it's being used for now is to like deny people health care. And that's bad. Like, we don't want that.
100%. Like, we have so many buzzwordy companies that went from big data to machine learning product.
Big data. I forgot about that one. Yeah.
Cloud-based. There's so many discarded promotional terms. But like, when you look at some of the most impressive uses of AI, it's really smart data scientists spending a long time actually working with people who deeply understand the thing they're trying to solve and custom creating these models that are really, impressive undertakings. The idea that chatbots, that LLMs, that, something to me that often is the least impressive technical aspect of machine learning, that somehow is the solution, that to me misses the point. And I think that in fact, what we see is inserting LLMs into everything is just a great way to increase the computational cost and the energy impact of anything. And, with a lot of these products, I do think we're going to see a market correction where people start to realize, oh, this isn't just something that's like a quick innovation fix where you can just plug into everything and somehow your life is better. No, it's like you can use some of these techniques, you can use some of these systems, you can use some of this just unbelievable investment in AI hardware to solve some really hard problems and do some cool stuff. But it's going to be an incremental refinement of the way you were doing data analytics before. It's going to be an incremental improvement. It's not going to be this sort of breakthrough innovation.
It feels so hopeless because I feel like our entire economy and tech system and government now is so optimized to move fast and break things and like optimize for immediate growth. I mean, so much of American culture already is based on instant gratification. Like, that concept is very American, I think, already. So what can we even do? Like, is this just going to keep getting worse, basically?
But I think part of the issue is that there are people doing these sorts of incremental upgrades every day, tinkering in the background, refining these systems, doing the hard, boring work. But that is a terrible storyline, so it often gets overshadowed. Like, we spend some time looking at cybersecurity and the way that so much of our cybersecurity infrastructure is built on this really, really rote, patching and upgrading, incrementally analyzing how you can, refine one level of protection or another, trial and error. And it is terribly boring. And whenever you hear about cybersecurity, it's the rare sort of cybersecurity failure. But when you think about how much better cybersecurity has gotten, that we're willing to do so many essential transactions online, that we're willing to store so much of our most sensitive data in electronic forms, like, it speaks to the way that we really have transformed what was once considered like peripheral data storage into the dominant way that we keep records, the dominant way that we live our lives. But that's the sort of thing that it's much harder to focus on when, people are trying to get, multi-billion-dollar valuations selling lem fluff and, nude image generators. And so I do think there is real cause for hope. And I think there's a real path for how we can sort of actually have our tech and have progress too. But it means having this realistic set of expectations where we're saying, oh, I'm going to stop, investing in the company, buying the product, supporting the solution at work where it's the most razzle-dazzle, high-tech, move fast option. My default position is going to be, what's the thing that sounds like, oh, this is a slight improvement. This is a way to make life a little bit better. Because when you start looking for, there are so many tech products out there. There's so many, systems refinements. There's so many home upgrades you can do if you're worried about security that, yeah, it doesn't have the multi-million-dollar marketing campaign of Ring surveillance, but having a better lock, having sometimes bars, having lights, having some of these really basic systems, the difference is they actually work. And those sorts of upgrades are actually, they're in almost every part of our lives, and they can just make our daily experience a lot better.
Well, Albert, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always such a huge fan of everything you're doing. And yeah, I'm glad we could spend some time looking at how, yes, things are bad, but yes, there's still cause for hope.
All right, that's it for this week's episode. If you like the show, please support my work on Patreon via the link below, or buy a paid subscription to my tech and online culture newsletter, User Mag, at usermag.co. That's usermag.co. I publish bi-weekly roundups of everything that I'm reading and following online. You can also get my newsletter via my Patreon, where I do bonus episodes, monthly Q&A live streams, and more. I currently have no long-term brand partnerships, so I rely 100% on your support to keep this channel going. Thank you so much. Every single dollar makes such a difference. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. See you then.